Hey everybody, I'm Jody Vance.
And I'm George Affleck.
And it is time for
UnSpun Saturday edition. It's Saturday.
My fault.
We're weird. It's kind of weird. We're here on a Saturday morning.
I don't know what day it is because I keep working 7 days a week. 7 days a week.
Butt off the last while.
7 days a week.
I know.
It's fun though.
You're a busy person. It's good.
Make hay while the sun shines. I'm almost as busy as you, George Affleck. You are. You're busy on Twitter.
Oh, I'm taking a lot of heat this last couple of days. I waded into the whole protest thing.
Which we are going to do officially here on UnSpun Podcast. Get yourself ready there. Prep it up.
Oh, God.
Well, I mean, we do need to unpack this. First and foremost, read the Orca. Go to theorca.ca. If you're finding us through some free download podcast, anywhere you get your podcast, go to theorca.ca and take a little perusal around because you're going to get some opinion and POV, if you will. But the rolling protests that have sort of built up.
Impressive.
I mean, they're
in
going
their
across Canada.
organization.
Right, but it's all the way across Canada these are happening, but then all of a sudden, BC became a real hotbed for it. Northern BC, certainly much more stressful. And maybe you can speak to that before we get into it a little bit, because you covered in Northern BC.
Yeah, I worked at Prince George for CBC. Back in the 90s, and I would go up there. I spent a whole summer up in Prince George, and I spent a lot of time. I would do documentaries quite often. I was a producer, and I was doing documentaries for the morning shows up there. And I spent a lot of time with First Nations groups in various areas. One time I camped out for a whole weekend with a youth group in the middle of nature, and there was
lived experience.
Go back to the nature kind of thing with all the elders, and it was quite emotional. But a lot of these First Nations groups in the north, I don't think people understand how many of them live in abject poverty. We have the First Nations down here in the Lower Mainland. You look at the Squamish and the Musqueam, and you look at where they live, and some of them, some of it's kind of rough, but they don't.
Improving though.
It's improving, and they're obviously negotiating these amazing real estate deals. Right. Those kind of things don't exist in the north. They're not. I mean, there's some oil and gas stuff that's happened in the past on First Nations land, certainly up in the area around Prince George and on the actual property where there's drilling and that kind of stuff, where they get a portion of the revenue. But what's happening with this pipeline is it's really providing a significant amount of money and infrastructure for these impoverished First Nations groups who have been, facing so many challenges for over 100 years.
There are Canadians, and I've written a column about this because people are like, you are just picking and choosing what you want to talk about when it comes to helping First Nations peoples. And I think it was like a year ago that I wrote a column about how I can't believe we're still having conversations about potable drinking water for all Canadians everywhere. Like, how is that not on the top of everybody's mind?
I think that somebody even did a calculation on how much it would cost. It's not even beyond
totally doable.
It's like the cost of a highway build in Fraser Valley for the whole country.
So while we're talking about those things, that's what I'm speaking to MLAs who are for First Nations peoples having a seat at the table when it comes to big business. As you mentioned, those in the Lower Mainland are certainly doing that now and building great infrastructure, affordable housing for all, really, and utilizing
pick up the slack of the city of Vancouver.
But using their ability to bypass bylaws to build. Yay!
Speed up the process.
It's
happening in the valley too.
Yeah.
It's projects out in Chilliwack and Abbotsford that are also focused on First Nations development partnerships.
But the conversation being, let's build the pipeline so the people who live there can have jobs. That from First Nations peoples, the elected chiefs,
empowered,
all 20.
empowered by being elected.
Right.
And that's where it gets kind of.
Then they're the hereditary chiefs.
Then there's a hereditary
I
chiefs.
got to speak with a hereditary chief live on the radio this week. I spoke with Chief Namox just as he was on his way to the smoke, which was after the planning meeting and going to be the meeting that we all heard was an all-clan meeting. And he was like, no, it's not. This is an all-clan. This is us coming to the table to discuss. And he even said, and I'm not quoting him specifically here, I wish I had written it all down because it was fascinating. But he had said, we don't work at the rate of speed that colonial Canadians want us to. We don't. This is our people's way. This is how we gather. This is how we discuss. And I said that, the rumors that have been flying around and indeed are on Coastal GasLink's front page saying we've offered them alternate routes and they've said no to everything. And I put that to Chief Namox and he goes, we have also offered 2 alternate routes. And they said no, because it didn't fit with their monetary expectations. So it's like interesting. So
there's some things we don't know.
There are some things that we don't. There are a lot of things we don't know. But what we do know is that there was, I don't know, 5 disruptions. One in Victoria, the poor frustrated guy was like, I might even agree with you guys, but you're blocking both bridges and I need to get over there. Like I need to get to work. And then Broadway and Cambie, that was huge disruptors. But the phone lines at the radio station and the reaction from citizens in the Lower Mainland absolutely exploded when the West Coast Express was shut down. That was the next level. Like we started talking about the single mother that was stuck downtown who couldn't get back to Mission to pick up her 2 children, and the clock at the daycare is $10 every 10 minutes, and she was however late, and it was like $200 that she didn't have. She had no one on the other side to get her kids. There was, the stress that this is adding to the lives of people.
Well, it's interesting to see the responses. And I think you interviewed the mayor of Vancouver. I heard that interview, and then I've seen the tweets from Brad West.
Yeah.
The difference in response from those 2 mayors.
For those who might have missed both, why don't you summarize, because you heard both.
Well, I mean, obviously I was yelling at the radio when you were talking to Kennedy Stewart.
You weren't yelling at me, though.
No. But, his opinion is basically just let it ride. Vancouver has always been a focal point for protests. It's where you come to protest, wherever your protest might actually be or issue. Vancouver is the center of places you protest. It's in our history. It's in our DNA, I think he said.
It is a little bit.
Yeah.
It is a little bit. So I've got to say, number one, if I could, because we do a lot of slamming on City Hall in Vancouver. We called. He
showed up.
He said yes.
Unlike the last mayor.
He was I couldn't get it.
I know. Anyway.
So Kennedy Stewart
I did think that when you were doing. I thought, okay, he showed up.
He did. He showed up. He knew it was me. And I'm sure he's heard this podcast before.
We know he's heard it because we heard it from his communications staff.
Oh, how many?
43.
Thank you. I was very thirsty.
I've been watching and listening.
A couple things that I liked about Kennedy Stewart's discussion on this topic live on the radio is he didn't skirt around the obvious. He protested at Burnaby Mountain. He was arrested there.
Yes.
So
it's
clearly,
in his DNA.
It is in his DNA. And I held his feet to the fire on that topic and said, okay, so clearly it's fine with you, but what are you going to do? Like how does this work with
how
the
far
VPD?
Does it go? When does what's the end game here?
Right. Whose call is it to actually make it so it's not impacting tax-paying citizens on tax-paid
And it's not his call,
street?
he said.
He said, well, I sit on the board.
I'm on the board. We don't tell the police what to do, which is true.
And I like that.
And
think about that in the United States right now, that politicians don't tell law enforcement what to do, because they kind of do.
Oh, well, yes.
And
chief of police is elected in the States, so it's quite different here.
Right.
It's appointed by the council. They make the decision as a council. And
I wouldn't want one politician or a few politicians being able to direct law enforcement, but that leads us to wanting to talk to law enforcement and saying, okay, what's your plan? And they're like, of course, we can't tell you the plan. Is it a Vancouver Police Department's problem? An already very strapped in an opioid crisis and all sorts of other things going on for VPD, and now this is on top for them.
Yeah, and I put out a tweet related to, and this is the one I'm getting a lot of hate on, in Vancouver. I talked about Bar Watch. Yeah. And I use this as an example. I didn't say do with Bar Watch for this, because Bar Watch includes identification and things like
Explain it a little bit more.
Bar Watch is something that was created by the bars themselves in cooperation with the police, Granville Strip. I think it's expanded beyond the strip now. It's partly about identifying. Well, you shouldn't have to show ID. Everybody shows ID when you go into a bar now. But it's also about if you're at a bar, and especially new bars when they open up, and there is this gang desire to take over the control of bars. It's something that's always at any city.
It's a moneymaker.
So you have this protectionist Paul's kind of approach by gangs. So Vancouver and Bar Watch was meant to push that out. I don't know if anybody remembers, but 20 years ago, a bar was blown up on Granville Street because the owner refused to pay and be a part of this gang structure. And so I think that kind of led to really that was a turning point in Vancouver on dealing with gangs' control of the bars. And so Bar Watch was created for this purpose. Obviously, it has challenges, and there are people who will say legally it's beyond the scope of what's allowed in the charter. My point was in my tweet, and obviously Twitter is always challenging, is if you're in a bar and it's a new bar or any bar, and there is gangs that start showing up, and
identifiable
gangs, they they get asked simply to move along. They say, time to get out, guys. It's basically, we know you're here. The owner doesn't want you here, and so they ask you to leave, and they do leave, and they kind of leave. They kind of left the city. They've gone to other cities, so
it has worked to some degree.
It's worked to some degree. Now, I'm not saying that I'm against protests, and I'm not against even civil disobedience when it's warranted. And I think that you interviewed that guy from Langley,
yes,
the chemist. What's his
a chemist in Langley, Blair King, a fascinating
Very interesting,
blog.
And he talked about civil disobedience. And civil disobedience, you have to understand if you're going to, and the protests we've been seeing at the legislature and the ones where they blocked the intersection, and this is what Brad West's comment was.
What did Brad say?
Well, he's basically saying this is illegal because you're stopping my residents from being able to get to their jobs or do what they need to do to live. And in the case you mentioned it briefly about the mom who couldn't get home and to get her kids from daycare, and if you're a parent and you've ever been late to get to, it's like they shut the doors. They're really mad if you're late, and they do charge. And
by the minute.
And if you haven't got a backup system, it's really stressful.
And it's stressful for the kids.
Yeah, because
it's not even about necessarily money.
Last kid in daycare. It's the worst.
Ever. So going back to a chemist.
Yes.
In Langley, because he actually is a chemist, but he's also not a former activist, but was more active in his activism in years past. And even in one part of this blog said, my activist community that's going to come at me, read this, and here's the law. Because there's a difference between protesting and illegal protesting, and the people that are doing it all under an umbrella of we have freedom of speech and the right to do whatever we want. We can block the entrance and exits at the BC legislature. We can shut down an intersection, or we can stand on rail lines. And those are illegal things. And
you have to understand, like the mayor of Vancouver, when he did this, he understood that he would get arrested.
So but you could end up on the railway. That is actually trespassing because it's private property. You could end up with a criminal record that could make it so you can't go into the United States, let's say, as a grown-up, or it's on you apply for a job 15, 20 years from now, and because you have a criminal record, they don't even care what it is. You have a criminal record, you're out. You're no longer a candidate.
So you have to
think
understand.
About
so
these things.
These are the ramifications.
Protest, but protest.
And
mindfully.
The courts, not the politicians, and will decide your fate. And so they are immune to politics in Canada, we hope.
What was the name of the bike protest that would happen once a month on a Friday? Critical Mass.
Critical Mass, yeah. It was a Friday night. We'd always, at rush hour.
Rush hour always happened. They'd meet, and we wouldn't really know
all the bridges.
We wouldn't really know which way they were going. But the thing that made that legal, and this is why I bring it up, is that they rode across the expanse of the roadway, but they kept moving.
Yeah.
Therefore, it was a protest. Had they stopped and blocked, that would have been illegal.
Right.
So the piece of this is with the moving protests that are literally happening right now on a Saturday, because they started at Trout Lake and then they're down at the SkyTrain station and they're heading over to the rail lines. As long as they keep moving, as long as the protesters keep moving, that's not illegal. But what they did at Broadway and Cambie, and what was done at the Granville Bridge, where you just stood there and blocked traffic, or at the BC legislature, barring people from getting into their place of work or access to a public building. Isn't it fascinating that Daryl Plekas is the first to actually take action? He also took my call.
He can get the injunction faster than anybody, I suppose.
He also took my call. I had a conversation with him on Friday, and I found it very interesting to hear how balanced he was, right? Balanced he was between, this isn't just about keeping the people in the ledge safe. This is about people who want to peacefully protest on the lawn of the legislature, because that's what it's for, to be heard. You are absolutely allowed to do that.
Government houses generally are good places for protests.
Yes,
of course.
But you cannot have a ceremonial fire on the front steps that puts everybody inside the building's health at risk, and then block video cameras or surveillance cameras, and then block doorways in and out. Then it all becomes a hazard. And this sweeping injunction that gives the security detail at the ledge, as well as Victoria Police, the right to arrest people who stand in the way like that. Not the protesters that are standing there, beating whatever the drum might be. Being a protester and being a civil disobedient are two different things.
So the challenge, though, and I think there is confusion out there about that, and I think there is fear by the police and by politicians to actually move in. They're afraid of riots. They're afraid of it turning really, really, really ugly. And,
no doubt.
Absolutely, given the anger that we saw in some of those protesters, in Victoria especially, a little bit in the Vancouver one at the Broadway and Cambie, but certainly in Vancouver or in Victoria, we saw some anger there. In EB's office, we saw some,
people were scared.
And there were people
office.
there that I've experienced in council. We were blocked at City Hall when I was in office. They blocked, it was a homeless and housing issue with Jean Swanson leading it. They barricaded all the doors into council, into the city hall.
This is and
so we couldn't get in. And then we literally started having a council meeting on the lawn of council because we had to start council. It's there's a rule. You have to do this. So the mayor and we had a mini council meeting on the lawn so they couldn't see us. They didn't know we were down there. And then they heard that we were down there and they started chasing us. And they chased us down the street because we said, and then security came and told us, get going, get to the other building, which was at Cambie and Broadway, the engineering building. And so literally we were running. It's like a evil Beatles video. Like literally, there's a gang of people chasing us down the street, and
to try and stop
me and Melissa and all of us. And
wow.
They wanted to confront us. And we went and had our council meeting at the other building, but it was one of those things. So the challenge is how much so the mayor seems to be open to just letting this in Vancouver to be completely carte blanche. It's okay. It's only a day-long disturbance.
Have a discussion.
It's what we do in Vancouver.
He says it's going to be solved by communication.
Okay, 43 people will be telling us what's really happening. But then you have Brad West who's saying, "Yo, no."
What would Brad do?
Well, again, as we've learned this week, the mayor doesn't tell the police what to do. And so it's up to the chief of the police, or whoever's in charge, whether it be RCMP or your local police force, to decide at what point. So, unless it's like Oppenheimer, which I think we're going to talk about as well.
We are going to talk about
it's
that.
like
we got a couple more
you
things
get
to
these
get
injunctions,
to.
you have to get an injunction for the police to move in. So generally the police will keep the council informed, and they will argue why they want to do this. And they look for support from the government, but if they feel like they don't need, they got to move on this, then they'll move on it.
Yeah. One more piece to there are so many pieces to the protest puzzle that is happening right now. The hereditary chiefs, elected chiefs, the rift that is internal that no protest can fix. The fact that the 20 elected chiefs of the 20 bands across this pipeline that have approved it, that want it, are internally battling with the hereditary chiefs. Now, the elected chiefs are for the reserves and the hereditary chiefs are for the lands. And that was something else that I learned from Chief Namox, who's the hereditary chief spokesperson. Right. And certainly he's coming from his perspective in explaining that. But it's this incredible frustration of people in the city trying to figure out, when somebody goes, well, whose side are you on? And it's like, well, I'm on the side of not having goods and businesses further stressed in a time of significant affordability crisis.
Right, but I also don't want violence on our streets.
I also don't want violence.
So it's a.
So how do we reconcile that?
My daughter, who's 23 years old, and she's she's an artist, and we were talking about this. She says it's challenging, and she decided just not to bring it up with her friends because it's too hot.
It's a hot issue.
And you look at my Twitter feed in the last couple of days, you can see how hot this is.
Even George _Affleck. It's quite something.
An interesting article in the Washington Post that talks a little bit sort of along the lines of that. What's the history of this? It's obviously biased towards the hereditary chiefs in that whole argument, but it's interesting because it does give you a history. It helps you understand where they're coming from. But of course, the elected chiefs are saying, "Well, this is what our people want." So they have their own governance challenges, and we have our own challenges of administration and governance in our cities.
Can I do a naive Jody? Why wouldn't they? Can I give one of those? Like, I don't know, the unspun for me in my head is, why wouldn't the Vancouver police, or the RCMP for that matter, because this all being dumped at the feet of the police force kind of bugs me. Like, it should be a full court press on everybody figuring out how best to manage this. Like, let's do a Greta kind of day. Greta managed to take 200,000 people at City Hall and walk them across the Cambie Street Bridge, and then gather downtown and everybody knew that there would be a disruption. I mean, we closed down the streets for Santa, for goodness sake. We can do this if we figure out a way.
We have done that for reconciliation two or three
right.
times.
But the Missing and Murdered Women and Girls March was Friday on the downtown east side, completely unrelated to these protests, and, rolled through the downtown east side. But my point, and naive Jody point, is why wouldn't the Vancouver Police Department file for the injunction that Daryl Plecas has, take all the bits that we already have of here are the issues that we are, because it's only going to get worse, it's only going to grow, then have that injunction in place so that it can be announced to the greater populace that we do have the right to arrest you. We are now capable and able.
I may be wrong. I think it has to be location specific.
Okay.
And so, because it's a moving protest,
that's
you don't know where it's going to be next. That's why they keep moving. So they were at Cambria Broadway, they were down here, they were there. And
you can't just say if you shut down a city street.
No, it takes about 24 hours to get an injunction. They can go and police. And that's kind of my point, is like, well, you could just go to that intersection and say, move along. Don't go to the sidewalks, is fine. Or go up to City Hall and stand there, but don't stand here. There was an interesting interview with, I forget who it was. I've seen a couple of interviews, but it's one was talking about why is it that the police and law enforcement officials and politicians have become the enemy, and why is it that we now look to law enforcement as, and I think a lot of it has to do with what's going on in America and the horribleness that we've seen there.
Or the yellow vest. Or we were watching 4 days ago, or a week ago, police on the streets of Paris were literally firing water cannons at firefighters who were demonstrating. Like, it was the police versus the firefighters. Like, what? That would just not happen here.
Everything is turning upside down, and it's really, really dangerous
It's
in
tense.
a lot of ways for the future, and I think we need to figure this out. So that's to your point, right? How do we bring it all together?
How do we bring it together? Well, Justin Trudeau.
At the end of the day, their argument is they're not stopping this until this pipeline is stopped.
And right. And Justin Trudeau is like, the pipeline's going through, and we're not going to get in the way of, the rule of law. He kept saying it over and over. Like, it's almost like everybody was handed out a script. Canada is a country of the rule of law. Mm-hmm. Everybody here has the right
That's what
to
the Premier
peaceful
said
protest.
Too.
Exactly.
See, it's a
the
rule
Premier
of law,
said it.
But what is, if we don't
Trudeau
want to
said
follow
it.
the rules, what happens then?
Andrew Scheer did not say that.
No, he said that he was a bit more controversial.
Right. He said, if I was in power. Okay, right. Can we talk about COVID-19? Can you believe how far off the top headlines this has gone? The coronavirus.
Oh, yes.
COVID-19, otherwise known as the coronavirus. I had the opportunity on radio a week ago to speak with Spencer Fehrenbacher, who is a young man who went on a cruise with his friends, and boy, is he ever glad that he bucked up for a balcony.
Because he's stuck on there.
He has been on this boat for a month. He's got 4 days. He's got 4 days to go. I spoke with him when he had been under quarantine for 3 days, I think. And at that time, 18 people had been taken off the ship with presumptive positive tests for coronavirus or COVID-19. And he said, the great news is this morning we got our results back and we don't have it in da-da-da-da-da. Fast forward 7 days, and he is now wearing a mask, talking to me through his mask like this, taking his temperature every morning, freaking out if his when they take the temperature. He is just like, I just need to get off of this boat, the Diamond Princess.
It's like a cesspool.
208
With Norwalk virus, they do the same thing. What do they do with Norwalk virus?
Norwalk virus, everybody off the ship.
So why?
Well, because, I shouldn't say that, because Norwalk hits usually when they're cruising, and then, everything goes down because it spreads so quickly. Like, everybody gets the virus so fast, and then toilets are overflowing and people are throwing up in buckets, and it's just I know, but that's what Norwalk is, right? So then they try and they get everybody off the ship because it usually passes fairly quickly. Sorry for that pun. But then they have to literally sanitize an entire cruise ship, which is not easy to do because it's a city.
But it's well, I think there's some similarities to how it's passed from one person to another. Although there is some questions on the coronavirus, but I just feel like I would be so angry that I would be trapped in this ship, and I would talk about rights. How
about being in an inside cabin with no window for 14 days?
Yeah,
you get an hour a day outside.
This is not good PR for the cruise ship industry.
No, and now there are news stories that are saying that it might not recover the cruise, the way that the cruise ship issue has been handled. Because Yokohama, Japan is like, sorry, we're not, just because you parked your boat here doesn't mean all these people get to come walking off where some of them might have.
But why are we flying people out of China into Canada who we know potentially have
quarantine at Trenton?
Yeah, so
but quarantine for 14
we do the same
days.
Thing with these?
We should be doing
I don't
the same.
Get it. Why is the federal government not getting involved in that? Like how?
Because they won't let them off the ship in Japan.
But what if people stop dying or start dying in the ship and they're Canadians? How does that work?
No, they take the people who are positive are taken off the ship.
Yeah, but there's always
in
new
hazmat
positive
suit.
ones coming along.
I know. I don't have the answer. I don't have the answer. A couple things I do want to hit off. High fives in a big way to John Cooper regarding the golf courses. I can't believe this golf course thing continues to happen. I used your line. They're revenue neutral. Leave them alone. This should be an agenda item. And Trisha Barker's like, just so you know, we actually make $10 million off the golf courses each year, and $3 million of that goes towards park board.
Yeah. They're debt because the city has cut their budget so much over the last 10 years that they have to find ways to make money.
Yeah.
And golf courses is one of them. And by the way, and there was a tweet that Dave Damaris, who's been the leader of this anti-golf coursing, clearly it appeared he'd never been to Langara as a non-golfer.
Right.
Because if you go to Langara, you can actually, and I have, run around it. There's great paths,
awesome.
trails all the way around. If you walk dogs, it's a massive sort of park around the golf course.
Yeah, and on a snow day or a crazy day,
he's talking about no, you got to pay to play kind of thing. I'm like, no, you just walk in there. It's right there. You go to past the
he just
YMCA
wants to be right
there, and it's right behind there, and go in.
He wants to win at all costs on this one
and
thing.
Him and Patrick Condon on this issue. It's like, what? There are a million pieces of land in the city that don't have green space on them, that is absorbing all the horribleness of our environment that you can focus on. For example, this giant space by Olympic Village that is just sitting there and it's owned by the city and it's just completely paved over. Why don't we put some housing on there? ASAP. We've got a little bit on there, but that site is meant to be a park and a bunch of housing, and it's sitting there empty. It's a parking lot. Come on, let's start there, guys.
And when John Cooper tweeted, the reason I brought up John Cooper was he was talking about the argument being that the golf courses are underused and da-da-da, and John say, well,
that's what they used to say about the
Bloedel
Conservatory, which he saved.
Which is now
a bunch of other people.
Brilliant place to take
10 times
family.
more,
Exactly.
30 times more, or whatever it is, a huge amount of people.
We're short on time and long on topics, but I want to get to the Auditor General piece of information.
Yeah, there was a big, really complex motion that came to council this week from Colleen Hardwick. It passed, and it basically was creating this committee that will now, this steering committee, or I think got a name for it. It now goes back to this 6-member committee, which has 2 Greens, 3 NPA, and an independent on it, which would be Rebecca, so kind of 4 NPA. And they will now develop what the plan is moving forward, which will come back probably the September, and they want to. So the likelihood of this person being in place by next year or by January, well, let's say their goal is January. It's government, so let's multiply that by 1,000. So we're looking at election issue probably in 2022 because the mayor does not want this. So they're going to push this thing back from a staff point of view as much as they can.
We want to keep our podcast under 30 minutes, so I'm just going to give a plug for my column, The Middle. Not really a middle thing. I'm going to try and find some middle on this because I'm going to speak with Health Minister Adrian Dix on CKNW Radio coming up because I'm Simi Sarah this week. Last week I was Linda. This week I'm Simi. So I'm on from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. and I want to talk about the experience that my son and I had in utilizing the new swab that I did. My mom was a lab technician. She used to throat swab me all the time when I faked being sick so I could stay home from school, and she'd call me at noon going, "You're fine, get to school," because I didn't have strep.
Wow, you got till noon. I got till like 9:15 and I was like, get out of here.
But you can get the swab at the pharmacy in 10 minutes. What used to take at minimum 24 hours to get results. So I did it thinking out of an abundance of caution. He came back positive for strep, but that was only the beginning of the story. So go to the orca.ca to find out the whole story. That's all time we have for today. A special Saturday edition of Unspun.
Bye.